Okay, so I'm working on the plug now for this mother mold. And what I've done is I got a little bit ahead of myself because I've already sprayed release, but I kind of wanted to just start this video off by talking about what I've gotten done to this point on creating the plug. As I mentioned in the last video, I had run out of epoxamite, so I was waiting on some more of that so that I could get the fiberglassing done. So this is just that mother mold that I showed to end the last video, and I've got the face skin in there. And the only other thing that I've done is I had some areas on the edge where it was short, so what I did was I just basically added a mini kind of clay wall right around the edge of this. And then I sort of smoothed it and refined it so that the resulting skin that I get when I inject this full of silicone will be, I guess uniform is the word that I'm using. The other thing I did was I packed in a little bit around the eyes. This particular skin had already had the eyes and nose holes cut out, and obviously the mouth was sort of cut out too. And as I'm doing the epoxy coat on this, I don't want that leaking through to any of those areas that are underneath the skin. So what I did was I just packed clay around the eye hole just to kind of make that so that nothing was going to leak through those areas where the skin wasn't quite perfectly I don't know, sealed around that eye socket. So I've got the face skin in there. I've got a little bit of clay kind of filling in the spaces where the face skin is not filled in. And then what I've done is I've used a couple of different things here. I used spray release, which is the same spray release that I used in the mold making video. It's just this stuff here. And I did 2 or 3 coats with that, each about 15-20 minute dry time in between each coat, just to make sure that it was staying on there. I sprayed all over the silicone skin, although I really didn't need to do that. I made very careful to get enough release sprayed on anything that is an epoxy coat thing, because I'm going to be putting more epoxy coat on top of this, and I do not want that epoxy coat to be sticking to this, because again, these are 2 parts that I'm going to be separating later. So the nose areas, what I did was, just because I wanted to make certain that I was getting enough release on those areas, is I also used a little bit of body double release cream that I just had sort of sitting around left over from old first time molding when I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And so what I did was I just got, that stuff is essentially like really thick honey. So I just got a pair of gloves, and I got in there and I just kind of smeared it around the part of the mouth that you can see, and then the eye sockets, and then also the nose. All of the other areas, I'm just going to go with just the release spray. It's been fine for me in the past. I've always lined the entire thing with clay. This is the first time I've done it where I'm actually putting an old silicone mask in there, which is kind of nice because it's going to make the process for me a little bit easier. And I'm not going to go into explain why that's easier, but for me, that's going to work, I think, really good. So this is where I'm at right now. I've got release sprayed on it, and then last night I'm laying in bed kind of prepping for today, and I remembered I still need to put the pry points in, and so that's what I'm going to work on next. In the next videos, I'm going to put some pry points. Essentially what that means is I'm going to put a thin strip of clay in these areas here to create a pry point. Because these right now are more of a registry point as opposed to a pry point. But I'm going to put a sort of kind of a wedge of clay inside of the registry point that will serve as a pry point later on, where I can put a stick or a screwdriver or some kind of an object to sort of bend it up and lip this thing to get it started. And then I'll go into showing how I get it apart later on. But that's where I'm at right now. This is going to be a much quicker video. I'm going to probably just do a lot of time lapse because a lot of it is the exact same process that I used to create what you see here. And so I'm just basically, I'm just repeating all of that stuff. And so I'm going to very likely just time lapse this video and make it much shorter. So yeah, I think that's it for now. I will do my best to try and think ahead, and if there's something that is new that I haven't explained, then I will axe the time lapse and do some more explaining. But with that being said, get ready for a quicker video with a lot more time lapse. One last thing that I forgot to mention is this thing has a hard time just sitting up on its own. It's wanting to wobble around, and it's not wanting to just, you know, sit like it needs to sit. So what I've found is I've just got these buckets, and I use them for garbage buckets, but I'll just put one on the counter like this, and then I'll just sit this inside of here, and it stabilizes it so that I can work with it and it's not falling all over the place when I'm putting epoxy coat on. So a lot of the time lapse here you're going to be seeing in this mold sitting in this bucket. And then what I do, because it sort of hangs over on one side here, so what I'll do is I'll epoxy coat this, let's see if I can, I'll epoxy coat this area down here, and then in order to get this area up here, because it's kind of sitting down in the garbage can, what I'll do is I'll just pick this up and I'll just move it like so. That way the lip of this area here, the lip of this here is hanging over the garbage can. It just allows me to get to this entire surface. But as I'm doing the time-lapse video, I'll try to move the camera back, and I'm sure all of that will happen so fast that you won't see it, but I wanted to just explain kind of how I'm securing this mother mold so that I can actually work with it. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. All right, so I've got the first pry point all in there, and that's sort of the finished product of the pry point. I could smooth it out a little bit more with water. I may do that, we'll see. So what I'm going to do is work on the other one now, so you can kind of see, but I wanted to show the finished one first. There's really not much to this. I'm basically just grabbing some ball of clay, and I'm going to shove it in place. Now, I probably shouldn't have sprayed the release before I put the clay in there. I could wipe it out, because I don't want that clay sliding around, but I'll just be kind of delicate with the epoxy coat, especially the first couple coats. I'm probably not going to use the compressed air on this particular, I don't know, maybe I will. We'll see. I don't need to capture anywhere near as much detail when I start doing the epoxy coat on the plug, because I'm going to go in and shave the plug. So I basically just put a big old glob of clay in here, kind of push it in. I should have done this before I sprayed the release, but I just wasn't thinking. And then I'm just going to use one of my sticks here to chop off some of this. Sort of chopping it off at an angle so I don't get any negative spaces that will grab. And I just pull that out of there. And I like kind of smoothing out the edge too. And then I'll just kind of get in there with my fingers, and it seems to be staying pretty good too. So I'm not worried about the fact that and I don't want it to be higher than the lip of my mold. So anyway, I'll just spray this out. I will have an opportunity to go in and clean up the mold. So these areas here where the plug will lock into these areas, and that will act as the registry points. And then this area here, after the plug is made, I'll pull the clay out, and then there'll be like an open space there where I can put something in there and then be able to pry it. So this area where the clay is acts as a pry point, and then these two areas act as the registry points where the mold can line itself up. Okay, so I got 2 of these done now. I'm going to do the other 2, but I think that you should be able to get the gist of how to do those pry points. So I'm going to work on the other 2, and then I'll get started with molding. All right. Okay, so I've got these pry points all set. They're not like real smooth or anything, but I'm not really worried about it because I can always go in and do some sanding to just smooth out the area. But that's essentially what they look like. I got a clay, chunk in there, wedged in each one. Again, I'll pull that clay out after it's all molded, after the plug's all done, and then sand that area out, and it'll give me a space where there will be a hole there where I can shove something in there, not a stick, and pry that open to get it to open up a little bit. And then I end up using a whole bunch of these to get it open each time, but I'll go over that later on in terms of how I'm opening up. But this is it. I'm going to spray just a little bit of release over the areas that I just worked on again, and then I'll let that sit, and then I'm going to get going on the epoxy coat layer. But this is the process, so probably from here forward it's likely going to be a lot of time-lapse video, so this should be a lot shorter. You're going to see me in the time-lapse. I'm probably not going to talk about it, but I'm only going to be putting probably freeform air in these spaces on each of the registry points, just to pack that full, because that'll be, I'll just try to pack it full to a point where I can get this area flattened off, and then I'll fiberglass over that. I'll also probably be using some freeform air down in these recesses here, because it's going to be really tough to get the contour down there with fiberglass. So freeform air probably in this area here around the nose, and a little bit down in the mouth, just because, again, it's just tough to contour the fiberglass down in those spaces. But there won't be anywhere near as much fiberglass, anywhere near as much freeform air that I'm using. I only have a little bit left from the other portion of the mold. And so I'll just use whatever I have remaining left, and I'll try to space it out so that I can get the plug completed. All right, so from here forward, a lot of time-lapse video. Hopefully, if any questions come up or things I need to talk about, I will stop the video and try to explain. Okay, so what I wanted to do was I wanted to talk a little bit about this plug, because when I was originally going to make this plug and when I started making it, it was sort of one thing. And then when I pulled it out of the mother mold and then tried to put it back in, I came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to work. It wasn't wanting to go back in cleanly. And in all honesty, I don't know exactly why. But it just wasn't lining up. I think that what happened was I made these registry points, I made them too tall. And I made that too tall almost all the way around. And so what I ended up having to do, and there's probably some wily veteran of this kind of this kind of stuff that could probably watch that video and see, as I'm doing it, probably going, oh boy, he's making those too tall. The nice part is it really ended up being a problem just with the plug, and it was something that I could solve just by kind of doing some sanding and whittling down at the plug. It didn't affect the mother mold at all, really, at least in a sense. So what I've done here, obviously, this is the plug, and just kind of a layout of what I have here. Here's the other side of it. And so what I've got here is I've got essentially the part that fits inside the mother mold, and then the space between this and the mother mold is where the silicone is injected. This is my injection hole here. I got some clay in it right now, which I need to kind of get out of there as I'm cleaning that out. The other holes that I have are, I've got the bolt holes here that line up, so those end up being registry points also. And then I've got some air holes. This is for the air to escape as I'm injecting the silicone. And every time I pour a mask, or every time I inject the silicone and pull it out, I got to make sure that these are cleaned out, because if they're plugged up, then there's no way for the air to escape. And then the only way, if I put this together and I forget that, then the only way to get it out of there is to push it in, and then you end up with a little piece of clay in your silicone that may or may not fall in an area of the mask that's visible. If that, you know, falls down into the nose or something, then you're going to lose that mask because it's a visible area that's not covered up by hair. But that's the plug. There's a couple things I did. The biggest thing that I did here, really two fairly large things I did, is I just did a general sand to try and smooth out the entire plug as best I could after I pulled it out. It did have some rough areas on it because if you remember, I epoxy coated over the top of a face skin. And so there were some lumpy little indents and stuff. And so I had to kind of shave all that down or sand it all down and try to smooth it out as best as possible. And then the other thing, and probably the most major thing I did, was I reduced the height of these registry points by probably half, and in some cases even more. I just tried to get it to a point where I could cleanly get it in and out of the mother mold, and now it's working really, really good. So your plug, if you're thinking about doing a mold like this, obviously you try not to run into this problem to begin with, but I think when I first pulled the plug out, it was really hard to get out, and I was worried about it. And then when I tried to put it back in, it wasn't going to go back in. Like, I had to shave down these registry points to get it back in. And that made it really tough. And when it first occurred, I was like really mad, thinking I was just going to lose and have to completely redo the plug, and in some ways redo the mother mold, because the height of these was married up to the registry points that I have set in the mother mold. So it's not perfect right now, but it works totally fine. So it doesn't look as clean and perfect as I would like, but it is producing skins that I'm really happy with. But this is the plug. The only other thing I did, which just took a few minutes, was I just took some plastic bonder just to fill in some of the little, just to try and smooth out the edge. There was some kind of little spots where it was just cut into there pretty good. And so what I did, I just kind of puttied it full with that glue, and then did a light sand over it. Remember, anything that's on this side is what you see on the inside of the skin, so no one's ever going to see that once it gets glued on the mask. And so that is it. But that is the plug. In the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to inject some silicone into this. And so what I'm doing is just prepping this plug to go back into the mother mold, and then I'll be able to go ahead and inject it. So the first step in that process is, because I want to get an easy release on this next one I do. So what I do is I just spray just the face portion of the plug with this easy release before I put it in there. So I'll spray it, and then I'll let it sit for 10 minutes to kind of dry, and then I'll put it in the mother mold, and then I'll lock it down with all the bolts and stuff. But that's the first step. So that's the plug, and then I'm going to go ahead and just give it a quick spray. Now, I know there's a couple of points in this particular plug that maybe don't release quite as easy, and one of those spots is right on the side of each nose. It just has a tendency, if the plug's being pulled out sort of an odd direction, then it has a tendency to want to pull on the skin there. And if for some reason the skin isn't cured as much as I want, then it can tear. And so what I like to do is really focus my release on the nose area, just to make sure that this pulls out of there nice and clean. And because I'm using all this release, before I go to paint, to do the silicone paint on the nose and around the eyes, I make sure to wash off all of the release agent before I do any of that. Otherwise, it's just not going to adhere. But that's it. The plug is prepped. It's all cleaned, all the powder off of it, or most of the powder, and I've got it sprayed now. So I'll let that sit for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to put it in. Honestly, I don't really need to let it sit because none of it's actually touching this, so I'm not even going to let it sit right now. I'm just going to get it all set up here. And so the way that this mold works is these top registry points kind of sit in there, and then I kind of pull this bottom part down, and then it closes down. It kind of locks on its own without even having the bolts in place. And so then I'm just going to go ahead and lock this thing up. You can see with some of the shaving that I did on the sides, there are some grooves on the sides just because I cleaned up the edges. I also kind of just did that on purpose to create a little spot where I could get one of those mixing sticks. So, you know, just bolting this down. I'll tighten it down. Missing a washer. There it is. And I've only got 6 bolt down spots, but. And then, and like I said, in the next video, I'm gonna actually do some of the injecting so you guys can see that in case you're new at this. So basically I've got somewhere around here, I got a screwdriver. I'll just hand tighten this, sort of. You don't have to be super tight. Just kind of. You really do want to get this fairly tight because if there's a little crack or something, that silicone will find its way in there, and then if it's seeping through the edges, then it's going to make that mask a little bit less. You're not going to get as clean of a pull. So that is it. That's mother mold ready to be injected. Just with the release, cleaned it off and got the release sprayed on it. Didn't even let the release spray because I just know from having done it before that I don't need to. And so what I'm going to do is in the next video, I'm going to mix up some silicone in this, add some color to the silicone, some pigment, and then what I'm going to do is put my syringe in there, and so I can get a better view there. And then I'll just inject it with this syringe. And then you'll get a chance to see the air holes. I'll try to see if I can zoom in and get you some close-ups of you know, the silicone coming out of the air holes and stuff like that. Not much to the process, but that'll be about it for the molding videos. So kind of approaching the end of this. Anyway, next video coming up. All right, so let's pour some silicone. This thing is I think it's about 19, if I remember right. It's a little over 19 ounces of silicone. So I'm going to be pouring part A and part B, and if I can get this open, be pouring about what is that, 9.5 ounces, is that right? Yes, 9.5 ounces. there is the part A. Now let's get the part B out of here. Got a pretty good amount of work time with this. Reset here. Just because this mold likes to wobble, I like to kind of use these two buckets to hold it steady, at least for the time being. Also got to kind of heat up some clay so that I have, gets a little looser when I, so it's easier to plug the holes up. So I just set it kind of in front of my heater. Other thing I want to point out too is I had to cut off the tip of this nozzle so that because it was poking down too far into my injection spot, and it essentially like plugs itself up. So like if this is the mother mold and it goes all the way through the injection spot, it was just kind of sealing itself there at the end. So I had to kind of cut off a little bit of it. I had that problem a couple times with a couple of molds, and it happened with this one too. So just clearing off this thing here, and it's all weighed out. It's about 19 ounces there. And then I'm using Silk Pig medium flesh tone. So that ought to be pretty good. So quite a bit of work time with this. So I'll spend some time mixing it up. It gets quite a bit of air in it as I'm mixing it. So really like to pour it slow as I can. That'd probably do it there. There's really not much to this process, but I had a couple people requesting to see this. syringe that I'm using is a 300cc syringe. I have a 500 one, but it, I think I broke it or something, and so I went back to my 300 one. And I can't get all of it in the 300, so what I end up having to do is 2 runs. It was a lot easier when I could just pour it all in one. But I'm gonna see if I can give you a better view of this pour. So let's do this. So I just set it in there so that it's kind of standing up. The nozzle on the end is kind of holding it in place. And then I try to just kind of have a long stream as I'm pouring it. And I try to just hit the side of the syringe, that way it gives it an opportunity to kind of work its way down, and all the air bubbles will kind of work themselves out of it. Also, it's just open to just slide into the mold right now. And I'm really hoping that as much of it as possible does slide into the mold. The reason being is because then there's a chance that if it's going in as I'm pouring it, then in all likelihood I can get all of this stuff that's in the tub right now in there with one pour without having to pull the syringe out. And then it's a little bit of a hassle. It's nice to just get it all in one syringe full, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of hoping for that. The first mask that I poured, I hadn't cut the end of it yet, and so I wasn't able to get it all. But this time around, I'm hoping that I can get it all. I won't be surprised if I don't, though. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Just gonna check and make sure that that's pushed down into the injection spot. But again, right now it's just kind of free flowing into the mold. It's building up. It's about halfway up the syringe, so I'm pouring it into the syringe faster than it's actually going into the mold. And in all likelihood, it probably needs to be pushed into the mold at some point. But again, I'm going to try and see if I can get as much of this as possible into the syringe on the first go around. So we'll see. Not really seeing any air bubbles in the syringe, so that's good. Yeah, I'm definitely not going to get it all in this first syringe. Got a good 3 or 4 ounces left in there. So what I'm going to do is just go with that, and I'll pull it out and pour more here in a little bit. But this way we'll get to see at least this. So basically I just put the syringe in, and I'll just slowly start injecting it. I'm going to see if I can get an even better view for this. See how that looks there. There we go. All right, so let's go. So I'm just gonna kind of brace it on the bottom. And I'm just slowly pushing it in. Kind of checking the bottom too. Trying to make sure that it's not somehow spilling out that site as I bump the camera with my head. I'm just putting gentle pressure. I want this to go in pretty slow. It's maybe like 10 milliliters. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. About every 5 seconds, I'm going about 10 milliliters, just slowly going in, trying to give that silicone a chance to kind of flow throughout the mold. Down to about 150 milliliters left in this batch. Once I get down to about 50, I'll go grab my clay, because what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to pull out this syringe. So I could kind of feel some air starting to push in there. So I'll grab my clay, because I'm going to have to pull the syringe out, and then I'm going to have to plug that injection site. Because if I were to try and pull the syringe out now so that I could pour more silicone in, it would just draw the silicone right out of the mold, which is not what I want to do. So I'm going to pull it out, and I'm going to plug it with my finger, and it just barely started coming out of there. So I'm just going to grab my hunk of clay. I'm going to plug it just for a second, wipe my finger off, and then I'm going to come back to my, and then from there I can, from my so I pulled the plug out of there, and then, I pulled the plunger out, and then now I can set it back in there. And I can see it starting to fill up the syringe right now. So now I can pour the rest of what I had prepared into this. I'm hoping you guys can see it. Just pouring the rest of the silicone that I had in this tub in there, because it didn't all fit in the first go around. And I'm gonna have to it's looking like most of it there. So that's it. I got most of it out of there. Just go and just plunge the rest of it in. Now I'm looking for, and hopefully you guys can see it, but I've got a hole here, 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 and then I've got two up in the corner, which I'll see if I can. Yeah, so I got one, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's most likely going to be coming out of this one first. So I'm just going to start going through it. And I don't want to push too hard, because I want, one, that air's got to have a chance to escape, and two, it'll start coming out of those holes pretty fast because it gets pressurized. So I kind of want to just, I'll hold up as soon as I see it starting to come out, one of them. I kind of stop and let it settle. I think I got to grab my clay and get it ready, because I feel like it's gonna. So there, it's coming out of that end one. And I don't want to lose too much, because I'm going to run out of silicone. I'm about at the end of my, but just started coming out of that one, so I can plug that one. I got a little bit of silicone left in here, and so I'm going to push it just a little bit more, and now it's coming out of these two. And I've kind of pinned this down so I have like the perfect amount of silicone poured. But if I had poured more and I was putting more pressure into it, then then I could have let more of it escape. But as it is, I'm just pretty much plugging it right when I see. Not really wasting much. So the last two holes are just here and here, there and there. So I'm just gonna put a little bit more pressure on it. See if I can get, just tipping it up to make sure that I'm pushing the, and there we go. And again, I'm trying not to lose any, so I'm going to plug it with my finger first. Wipe away what I have there. There, so all the air vents are now plugged. So this thing is full of silicone. It's pushed all the air out that it can push out. Just going to press down on these and make sure that they're going to hold. Sometimes silicone gets all over where that hole is, and that clay doesn't want to really stick to it if there's silicone all over the surrounding area. So now what I do is I just got to plug that injection site. So I'm just kind of warming up a little bit of clay in my hand because all I had left was this chunk that wasn't very warmed up. And it plugs that hole a lot better if it's warmed up. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out. 1, 2, 3. And I didn't have a ton of pressure. Sometimes when I pull that injection site out, it is so pressureful that silicone just starts pouring out like right away. I'm gonna try and wipe some of that excess up down there just to get it out of the way, because again, I want this clay to stick to that spot. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but I'm gonna plug it really fast. Right now I've just got my finger plugging it, but 1, 2, 3. So I think I'm good. It wasn't super pressure packed. The nice thing is that even though it's not super pressurized at 19 ounces, it's still full enough. One thing I like to do just to make sure I've got a good seal down there is I'll try to wipe up any of the excess silicone around the clay, and then I like to watch it for a couple minutes just to see if more silicone starts pooling up, then that means that it's not, the clay isn't sealing it, and so I need to push it down more. But I'll keep an eye on all of these spots that are plugged up with clay to try and make sure that I've got a good seal on that. Otherwise, I'll let that sit. Needs to sit for about 4 hours before I can pull it. This particular one, it's pretty late right now, so I'm just gonna end up pulling it tomorrow. But that is it. I just got my bucket, my silicone bucket. Let's see if I can. There we go. I've just got my silicone bucket here, and I'm just going to leave all the silicone sitting in it. It makes it easier to pull out later on. I'll wipe off the end of the plunger. For some reason, the silicone does not cure on the end of the plunger. I don't know, some sort of a chemical reaction with the type of rubber there or something. I don't know. But I have to wipe it off because it doesn't cure. If it did, I could just peel it off after it cures, but as it is, I just have to wipe it off. But everything else in here, I'll wipe down the mixing stick. I'm good there. But I'll let all this sit in here, and then I'll just let it cure, and then I'll just pull it out later. So I'll let that sit. All right, I think that is it for injecting the silicone into the mold. All right, so I've injected the mold, and this particular one has been sitting overnight. And I'll cover the injection process and the specifics about the plug in another video. I'll probably attach them all to this one, but in this video, what I want to do is just pull this thing apart. So I already started. I took out one of the bolts out of there. You can see the spot here. I've got 6 bolts in this thing. I've labeled it. It's actually closer to 20 ounces. This says 18 as I was trying to just figure out. And then these clay things, the little clay pieces are basically just to plug the air holes when I'm injecting it. They're just air releases, and so when the silicone starts coming out of there, that means that they're ready to be plugged up. So I just take those off. This one down here is for the actual injection spot, so I pull that one out. And some of them, because I end up pushing the clay in pretty good just to make sure that they're plugged, especially the injection spot, it has a tendency to get clay stuck in it. So before I do another mold, or before I inject another one, I got to make sure to clear those out. But anyway, I'm just going to work on taking this apart so we can see if this turned out all right. I've already pulled one out of this. You can see off to the left here, there's my junk mold is sitting there, and I'm using my junk mold to cast the underskulls. So that way I don't have to cast them in this mother mold here, and it really helps take a lot of stress off of the mother mold. In the past, I've used the mother mold to create both the face skins and the fiberglass underskulls, and it always seems like pulling the fiberglass underskulls out of this, which is a rigid mold, puts quite a bit of stress on it, especially in the mouth area. And so it really is going to prolong the life of this mold using that junk mold. Using that junk mold to make the underskulls. Okay, so I've got all the bolts off. There's kind of a specific way and I'm going to go over it again later, but the plug really gave me a lot of fits. I thought I had nailed it, and then it gave me a lot of fits, so I had to kind of jimmy rig it, doctor it quite a bit to get it to work smoothly. And it's working pretty good right now, at least it did in the first casting. And so I'm going to kind of just show the process that I go through here of trying to get this open. Now, I've gone through some pretty interesting ways of getting these molds open as I've learned how to do this. And the way that I probably like the best now is just using these sticks, these craft sticks, mixing sticks. And I basically just go into my pry point, and then I lift, or I try to separate a little bit, and I just get this stick sort of started here. And sometimes it's easier said than done. This particular one looks like it's sealed up pretty good, so it may let's see if I can. So there's some spots down here that are opened up. So I'm just going to start shoving these sticks in it all the way around the seal and just slowly start trying to open this thing up. Usually once I get it started, it goes pretty smoothly, but sometimes getting it started can be tricky. There's that, and then I got a rubber mallet to kind of, these things break all the time, so kind of just tap on them. And I don't want to force it, like I just want to kind of ease it open. Again, that's to prolong the life. If I was just going to be using this once or something, I could probably just rip it open, but I'm just gonna kind of work my way around this and see what I get. I did spray the plug with release, so I'm hoping that that's gonna aid me here in getting the seal. I haven't felt any real release happen yet. At some point there might be like a release of air that happens, in which case that usually is a really good sign. I don't know if you can see it on the video, but I am getting some. Sometimes I'll just tap those other ones in. I've got one stick around. Usually by the time I get to like 3 sticks, it seems like it usually opens up at that point. This side over here seems like it's, I don't know, it just wants to be tricky. Seems like it's always, I'm saying always, but I've only done this a couple times. There we go. It's looking pretty good. Sometimes too, I'll just let it sit here for a few minutes, as it just kind of, the pressure of those sticks in there will start to, you know, just kind of release tension slowly rather than just trying to force it. These are already loosening up, so I can tell that that's happening. And for some reason it wants to release sooner at this spot here, so I end up working on this spot more. And there, I just felt the air release in there. So this one's going to come apart really easy, I think. These sticks are loose. This thing is ready to open. And actually, as it turns out, this one's probably one of the easier ones to open. So I'm really excited about that. But I'm just going to put my paintbrush in there and just kind of work each side a little bit. But this thing is ready to open up. I'm going to see if I can just get it open with my hands. Again, I'm just going slow because if there's a spot of the silicone that's grabbing or something like that, I don't want to force it. All right, so let's take a look at what we got. All right, so injected silicone there. That's fresh out of the mold. Well, not even out of the mold yet. I got a little bit of silicone spill over here, but I can just it kind of acts as a seal. Sometimes I'll just leave this here, but just because I want to kind of clean it up right now, probably peel it off. I got a little bit of silicone kind of leaking out of some spots, but nothing that's causing me to have to, you know, rework anything or sand anything down or fill anything. But anyway, it's looking pretty good. And what I like to do, just because this EcoFlex is pretty tacky, it's not on my fingers, but like when you touch it, it's pretty tacky. And it seems like it takes a couple days for it to really cure. And so what I will do, just so I can work with it more quickly and not have all that tackiness, is first off, I'll peel off all this excess around the edge. Really pleased with how this mold is working so far. This being the second pull that I've gotten from it, it's really turning out really well though. This skin here seems to be very clean, and the first one was pretty clean too. Well, it was very clean. Definitely the cleanest pull I've had on a first run through of it. Usually I have to make all kinds of adjustments, and this time around the first one I did was I would say it's an A pull, which is good. So maybe I'm learning something. Anyway, so because it's tacky and I want to work with it right away because I want to pull it out of there, I just use some baby powder. This is just like foot powder, but I put baby powder in it. And I just load this thing up. I'm just trying to get rid of that tackiness. I hate that feeling. I feel like it kind of speeds up process of just being able to handle everything. And then I just kind of wipe it in. And it gets rid of that tackiness instantaneously. So it makes it easy to handle. If there was ever any question about whether it was cured or anything, I mean, I'd left this one in overnight, so it wasn't a question at all. But if there was ever any question about if it was cured or not, then this stuff definitely gets it feeling like it's cured and dried and ready to be pulled out of there. Anyway, there's a little bit of excess in there, you can see, and I'm just kind of rubbing it around. But that's good. I mean, that's ready to be pulled out of there. So I'm gonna pull it out. I'm gonna be careful as I pull it out. There's a couple of spots like in the corner of the mouth and the eyes where, you know, I don't want to just rip this thing out of there. I want to be gentle with it. Especially around the nose. There's some areas around the nose that I always worry about them tearing. I've never had it tear, but seems like I always just worry about that. All right, so let's see. Let's take a look at this thing. Now, I'm going to put baby powder on the top of it too, but I'll do that here in a second. So pull the plug over here. And just going to lay this casting on top of there. So again, this is just the plug, and this is what I injected into that. And I'm gonna baby powder the top of this guy. Before I inject another one of these, I will definitely go and clean off all this baby powder and just get it to a point where I don't want baby powder in my casting. So just getting all that tackiness off of it. After this stuff's sat on there for, I don't know, a couple hours or something like that, I'll go and I'll just wash it off. And the way this silicone is it always gets a little bit tacky when you really clean it off a lot, especially if you use like an alcohol wipe or something, which is before I paint silicone, I will wipe it down with alcohol. I'll just wipe it down with this stuff, this rubbing alcohol. And it's sort of like, I feel like it activates the... All right, so that's casting number 2. I've had a couple of spots in the nose in the past that want to tear like right back in this area here, and so I just go and check those, and it's just super clean. I'm so happy with this. There's no pulling as I'm pulling it out of the mold or anything. This is without a doubt the best job I've done of casting this. So this is outstanding. I'm really happy with this, and that's a little bit of a look there at just pulling a fresh cast out of this mold. So I'm going to set this aside, and then the next video I want to open up the junk mold here and see if I can pull my very first underskull that I made in the junk mold out of there, and we'll see what that looks like. And then the first face skin that I did in this mold is also inside of that. So I'll probably lump all these videos together. There's a little lumpy spot right here, and that's from the spot where I injected the silicone. It always kind of leaves like a little plug there, and so I got to cut that off, which I will do. I'll do right now. And so there's no more lump anymore. But that is it. This is the plug here. I'm gonna, like I mentioned in another video, I'm gonna talk about the plug and what I've done with it, along with the actual injecting process. And I'll probably lump all of these videos together just to kind of do sort of a completed mold making thing. But anyway, there's the face skin number 2. Very happy with that, and we'll see you in the next video. And then one more quick little video. Sorry, I keep thinking of little things that people might want to see. Where I'm just putting that face skin that I just pulled, that face skin number 2 from this mold, and I'm just putting it in the now the last one of these that I did, the last one that I fiberglassed, I cut out the eyes from the skin, and I cut the nostrils, the eyes, and I trimmed the mouth. In this next one, I think what I'm gonna do is, because I had a lot of, because I cut the eyes and the nostrils out and trimmed the mouth out, I had a lot more of the resin, the fiberglass resin, leaking through, and so it's kind of coated the skin, and so it's gonna just make more cleanup for me. In this next one, I think what I'm gonna do is not cut out the eyes, not cut out the nostrils, and then I think maybe I'll get less leakage going through, and I don't think that that's going to cause any kind of an issue later on. But we'll see. But as I think about that, I probably shouldn't have cut out this stuff for that first one. That's something I could definitely clean up, but it does create a little bit more work for me. So with the next one, I think I'm gonna just kind of go with it the way it is, and then take a look at it when it's done. I'm hopeful it'll be less work. All right. Okay. Make sure my video's running. Yep. All right. So this is the junk mold. I put the skin inside of it, so I can get a better view there. I put the skin inside of it, and then I fiberglassed on top of it. And I'm thinking that because this is made of a rebound material, silicone, which is rebound 25, that it will be much easier to get out of here. I'm hoping that that is the case, because I've never done it like this before, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that I didn't even think of using my junk mold for this kind of a thing until I've done this for about 2 years. So you know, we live and we learn. But this is literally the first time that I've used my junk mold for this. So I'm just pulling the bolts out of this thing. I got one more here in the front. I've got 5 spots here, but this junk mold really wasn't being stressed, so I just did 3 spots. It holds together really well. I put a little bit more effort into this junk mold because I had an idea that I was going to be using it for this purpose, and so I wanted it to be a little bit more sturdy, whereas in junk molds in the past, I have maybe cut corners on them more so, just simply because I was really only going to use them to create that clay cast. All right, so pulling this out of the junk mold, so that's just that outer casing. I did make a video for this, but I need to actually put it together. But this is the junk mold, 2-part. Well, this is the outer shell of it, but this just holds the rebound portion of the mold. Anyway, so I'll set that aside. And I've got the fiberglass, and boy, it feels very sturdy. It feels heavier than, I used more fiberglass in this one, mostly just because it was the first one, and I was just really wanting to, like, better to overdo it with the fiberglass than to underdo it. But it's quite a bit more. And I was also using the epoxamite, the 102 medium, and it takes a little longer to set up, and it's been pretty cold in my garage, so I'm wondering it might need a little bit more time to set up. I'm pretty sure that I can pull this off, but I may have to just kind of sit it on somewhere with the heat. Anyway, so the way I did my junk mold is to get this thing off of here, because if I just ripped it off, then it gets, this silicone can kind of get stretched out, and so you sort of lose your shape. So what I did was I cut it all the way up to, let me get this more in camera. I cut it all the way up to about the center of the head, and so what I do when I pull it off is I just want to be careful. I don't want that to tear a whole lot more. I could also use like Silpoxy and go back and just glue some more of that seam if for some reason it starts tearing. I think I'm not concerned that wow, that's super smooth. Much more smooth than I would ever get in my other. That's fantastic. Anyway, so I'm just kind of trying to be careful as I pull this thing off, because I don't want that to tear, and I'm really hoping that the silicone just comes off there smooth of that previous mask, and it seems to be coming off very nicely. So good. So this is the junk mold. And so now this will just go back in that shell, and I'll just basically, I'm going to essentially just be, let me show you a better view of this. But I'll put it back in that shell, and it's just going to help me create underskulls. And it'll put a whole lot less stress on that mother mold. So I'll put that back together here. I'll put the junk mold back together here in a second. I don't want to leave that rebound. It's pretty thick and it's not going to lose shape quickly, but I don't want it to lose shape, so I like to get it back in the shell pretty quickly. Yeah, I definitely used more fiberglass than I needed on this, but this is an outstanding underskull. Really, really good. Super pleased with that. There's quite a bit of excess on this, the way it is. My junk mold's quite a bit bigger. It has just more face, so this is all going to get cut off here. It'll basically get cut all the way up to the skin, and then it'll kind of just come across the back here. I'll get a Sharpie to show you better visual. Very pleased with this right now, this being the first one I pulled out of that. But this will basically just be my cut line. Probably come up to about there. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, it'll just kind of extend around the back. And it'll come around the other side too, obviously. But, and then the hinges and everything will go underneath this. But very pleased with this, as yeah, that looks great. Much cleaner than my first pull of the underskull from the junk mold and the second pull of the skin. So what I'm going to do now is I'll set up the junk mold. I'll put that skin that I pulled in the last video inside of that, and then I'm going to just lay fiberglass on top of that to create another underskull. But this is pretty good. I don't think I'm going to use as much fiberglass the next time around, because this thing is, I usually like it to have some give in the back, and this one doesn't have much. That way, like when you're putting it over your head, you can kind of pull it out or push it in, or just kind of manipulate the fiberglass a little bit to get it on the head. But that is the first kit underskull from this particular mold, and I am extremely happy with it.